The wind was dry that morning, and the land felt older than usual. Ellery Vance stood at the edge of the corral, boots planted in the cracked dirt, black coat trailing behind her like a funeral flag. It had been 87 days since her father, Thatcher Vance, died with his hands still stained by the earth he loved more than people. She hadn't cried. Not at the service. Not when the will was read. Not even when she found the old saddle with his initials burned into the leather. But now, watching the last horse he ever raised, the untamable coal-eyed stallion named Ashfall, thrash inside the ring, something behind her ribs began to ache. The townsfolk came to watch. They leaned on fences, whispered, speculated. Most thought she was crazy. Others said she was testing pride, not skill. But Ellery didn't care. She'd announced it plainly. If you call yourself a real cowboy, prove it. Saddle Ashfall and ride him clean. No one had succeeded. Not yet. One by one, they tried. Ranch hands, rodeo stars, even a retired Marine who claimed he once broke wild mustangs in Arizona. Ashfall threw them all. Violently. As if he could smell their intentions before they touched the reins. Each time someone hit the ground, Ellery didn't flinch. She watched with arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. Inside, however, she was unraveling. Ashfall was more than a horse. He was the last living piece of her father. And if no one could ride him, maybe no one was worthy of what the Vance name meant. Or maybe, just maybe, what it meant was already gone. Buried 6 feet deep with Thatcher himself. And then Boen Kittredge stepped forward. He didn't say much. Just tipped his weathered hat, walked slow toward the gate, and leaned a hand on the fence post like he'd done it 1,000 times. His coat was torn at the sleeve. His boots had stories. His eyes, blue, tired, and steady, met Ellery's for a split second. No cockiness. No charm. Just something old and broken. She didn't recognize him. Not exactly. But something in her bones did. And that scared her. Boen climbed the fence and dropped into the ring without ceremony. Ashfall stilled. No snort. No charge. Just stillness, like the moment before lightning strikes. Boen didn't rush. He didn't reach. He just stood, letting the dust settle around them. Ellery held her breath. So did everyone else. And for the first time, Ashfall didn't run. No one spoke. Dust floated in the air like ash from a dying fire. Boen Kittredge stood still, boots buried in the dirt, eyes fixed on Ashfall. The stallion stood just as motionless, muscles coiled beneath his black coat, nostrils flaring with each breath. Ellery Vance leaned forward slightly, hands tightening around the fence rail. She had seen Ashfall rear, strike, and nearly kill a man for just stepping too close. But now, something was different. The silence wasn't tense. It was sacred, as if horse and man were speaking in a language no one else could hear. Boen lowered his head slightly, not in submission, but in respect. Then he took one slow step forward. Ashfall didn't move. His ears flicked back, then forward again. Another step. Then another. The crowd around the corral held its collective breath, afraid to even blink. Ellery felt something stir in her chest, faint, unfamiliar. She had told herself she didn't believe in signs. Her father did. He believed in omens, bloodlines, and gut instinct. But now, watching this stranger move like he belonged there, like the dust already knew his name, she wasn't so sure anymore. Boen stretched out his hand, fingers loose, palm facing the ground, non-threatening, patient. Ashfall tossed his head once, testing him. Then, miraculously, took a cautious step forward. And another. The stallion's hooves made no sound in the soft dirt as he approached, inch by inch, until his nose hovered just inches from Bowen's hand. Ellery felt her heart slam against her ribs. She had waited months for this. For someone to reach him. To reach her father's legacy. And now that it was happening, it felt like something inside her was cracking open. When Ashfall finally nudged Boen's hand, the gasp from the crowd was audible. Boen didn't flinch. He didn't smile, either. He simply let the horse touch him, accepting the moment without trying to own it. He brought his other hand up slowly and rested it on Ashfall's neck, just below the thick mane. The stallion didn't move away. He didn't resist. For the first time, he stood still in the presence of another human being. It wasn't obedience. It was trust. Ellery's throat tightened. Her father had once said, "You don't ride a horse like Ashfall. You earn him." Until this moment, she thought no one ever could. She stepped back from the fence, unsure whether she was witnessing a miracle or something far more dangerous. A man she didn't know breaking through walls she'd spent years building. And in that same breath, she realized something chilling. Boen Kittredge wasn't riding for the horse. He was riding for something else. Ellery didn't sleep that night. Even after the crowd left and the dust settled, her mind stayed wired, looping the image of Boen's hand resting calmly on Ashfall's neck. She replayed it over and over, how the stallion leaned into him, how he didn't flinch or force it. Just stood there like he belonged. She sat on the edge of her father's old desk, the room still smelling faintly of saddle oil and pipe tobacco, flipping through a stack of forgotten ledgers. But her thoughts weren't in the numbers. They were outside, in the dark, where Boen had set up a small canvas tent near the north fence, by choice, not invitation. She hadn't spoken to him since the corral. She didn't know what to say. He hadn't asked for anything. No offer, no praise, no money. He just nodded once and walked away, like a man who'd seen too much to be impressed by applause. Ellery kept waiting for the catch, for the moment he'd say, "I want the horse. I want the land. I want something." But it never came. That silence was worse than any demand. It made her uneasy. A man like Boen didn't just show up out of nowhere and win the loyalty of a horse that hadn't let anyone near him in months. Not unless he was running from something. The next morning, she found him already awake, sitting on a crate, cleaning his boots with an old rag. Ashfall grazed quietly behind him, untied and free, but he hadn't wandered. He stayed close, like he'd chosen his person. Ellery crossed her arms, her voice sharper than she meant. "You're not here for the horse, are you?" Boen didn't look up. He kept wiping the dust from his boots like the question didn't deserve a fast answer. Then, finally, "No, ma'am. Not just the horse." She didn't like that answer. It was too honest, too open, too uncertain. She looked down at Ashfall, then back at Boen. "Then what?" she asked. He finally met her gaze, his eyes clear but tired. "I needed to know if I still had it in me. The part that knew how to earn trust." He stood slowly, rolling up the rag in one hand. "That horse, he doesn't give it easy. Neither do people like you." The words hit her harder than she expected. She stepped back, blinking like something had just slipped past her defenses. People like her? What did he mean by that? Did he see right through her, or was it just coincidence? Either way, she didn't like the feeling. Vulnerable wasn't a language she spoke anymore. And as she walked away, jaw tight and heart pounding, she heard him quietly say behind her, "I knew your father." Ellery froze mid-step. The air thickened around her like the moment before a storm rolls in. Her spine stiffened as she turned to face Boen. "What did you just say?" she asked, voice low, clipped. He didn't flinch. "I knew your father," he repeated, eyes locked on hers. For a long second, all she could do was stare. The name Thatcher Vance wasn't one that people threw around lightly. Not in Calhoun County, and certainly not around Ellery. Her father's legacy was a fortress, respected, untouchable, sealed tight behind decades of reputation and silence. And now this stranger was cracking it open like it was his to touch. "How?" she asked finally, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Boen looked past her, toward the hills. "Rode with him a long time ago. Before your mother passed. Before this place was what it is." His voice didn't waver, but it carried the weight of something buried deep. "He taught me how to ride smarter. I taught him how to take a fall." He gave a dry, humorless chuckle, then stopped himself. "We weren't friends. But we understood each other." Ellery's chest tightened. Her father never spoke of that time. Those in-between years after her mother died, when the ranch nearly folded and he disappeared for long stretches. She'd always believed he was chasing buyers or contracts, trying to keep the land afloat. But what if he was chasing something else? Or someone? She narrowed her eyes. Why now? After all these years, why show up here? Boen didn't answer right away. His hand brushed the side of Ashfall's neck without looking. "Because I lost something I couldn't get back. And I figured, maybe I owed it to someone who still had something left." The words sat between them, unsaid and unfinished. Ellery didn't ask what he'd lost. She didn't want to know. Not yet. But something about the way he stood there, calm, centered, but clearly carrying ghosts, made her feel like her father had left behind more than horses and tools. Maybe he'd left behind promises. Or regrets. Maybe Boen was one of them. She took a breath, trying to steady herself. "If you came here looking for closure, you won't find it in that corral," she said, voice sharp again. "My father's dead. And whatever happened back then doesn't matter now." Boen gave a slow nod, eyes still on her. "That's the thing about the past, Miss Vance. It always matters. Especially when we pretend it doesn't." That night, long after the sky turned black, Ellery opened the bottom drawer of her father's old desk. Inside, buried beneath yellowed maps and broken spurs, was a photo she didn't remember ever seeing. Her father and Boen Kittredge. The photo haunted her. It wasn't just that her father stood beside Boen, it was how they stood. Thatcher Vance had his hand on Bowen's shoulder, not stiff like in family portraits, but familiar, almost proud. They looked like men who had bled together, trusted each other once, maybe even depended on one another. But there was something else. Boen looked younger in the photo, but his eyes had the same grief-worn heaviness they carried now. Ellery sat with it for hours that night, candlelight flickering over the grain of the wood desk, wondering how much of her father's life she never really knew. By morning, she was angry. Angry at Thatcher for keeping secrets. Angry at Boen for holding on to them. She found him saddling Ashfall near the south barn, quiet as always, the horse calm under his hand. "You should have told me the truth the moment you stepped foot here," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the stillness. Boen didn't turn around. "You weren't ready to hear it." That only fueled the fire burning in her chest. "Don't you dare decide what I'm ready for," she snapped. "If you knew my father, then you knew he wasn't the type to hand out second chances." Boen turned to face her then. His face was unreadable, but his voice held weight. "Thatcher gave me more than a second chance. He gave me a reason to stay alive." The silence that followed cracked something inside her. She had spent years chasing that same reason, believing it died with her mother or faded in the shadow of her father's expectations. "What happened between you two?" she asked, softer this time. Boen hesitated, then said, "We were in trouble. Real trouble. And your father took the fall for something we both did." Ellery's breath caught. What kind of trouble? But Boen looked away, jaw tight. Not yet. She hated how that answer made her want to know more. Hate was easier than confusion. Hate had edges. But now everything felt blurred. Boen walked past her, slow and steady. "I didn't come back to steal anything. I came back because I'm tired of pretending that none of it mattered." Ashfall followed him, like the past trailing close behind. That evening, Ellery returned to the desk, this time looking deeper. She tore through drawers, opened cabinets she hadn't touched in years. Behind a loose panel, she found an old leather journal. Her father's handwriting filled the first page with a single phrase. "If she ever finds this, forgive me." The leather journal felt heavier than it should have. Ellery ran her fingers over the cracked cover before opening it, her breath tight in her chest. The handwriting was her father's, sharp and deliberate. The kind of penmanship that came from discipline, military, ranch work, loss. She turned the pages slowly, each one filled with fragments of thought, regret, and memory. He had never been a man of many words, at least not with her. But in these pages, he spoke in ways she'd never heard. And what he said began to unravel everything she thought she knew. The entries weren't dated, but they told a story. About a night years ago, when Thatcher and a younger Boen were ambushed transporting stolen livestock. Not stolen by them, stolen for them. A deal gone wrong. Someone had set them up. There was a sheriff's deputy involved, and blood on the ground by dawn. Thatcher had turned himself in, saying he acted alone. He did time. Quiet time. No trial. No headlines. No one ever knew. Ellery stared at the page, numb. Her father, a criminal. Or maybe, a protector. Boen had never told her the truth. But now she understood why. He wasn't running from the past. He was carrying it. Her father had taken the fall for both of them. And Boen had vanished, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of fear. She closed the journal slowly, her pulse loud in her ears. The version of Thatcher she had built in her mind, the untouchable man of rules and legacy, was gone, replaced by someone more human. But when he finally spoke, it wasn't to her, it was to Ashfall, gently stroking the horse's mane. "I'm trying to be someone worth forgiving." Ellery didn't speak to anyone for 2 days. Not Boen, not the ranch hands, not the curious neighbors who passed by under the guise of checking in. She spent most of the time riding the edges of the property, letting the silence of the land settle in her bones. The journal hadn't left her side. She read it again and again, memorizing every line, every confession her father had hidden in ink. It felt like Thatcher Vance had finally spoken to her, not as a legend or a ghost, but as a man. And that man had made mistakes. On the third morning, smoke rose from the west hills. Not much, just a thin gray trail curling into the sky like a warning. Boen spotted it first and rode hard to the ridge, Ellery not far behind. Wildfires were common this time of year, but this one wasn't natural. "It's been set," Boen said, eyes narrowing. "Gasoline burn. Someone's trying to push something." Ellery stared at the smoke, a sick feeling rising in her gut. "Push us off the land," she said. "They know it's vulnerable." Boen didn't have to ask who they were. There were always men who wanted the Vance land, its grazing rights, its water access, its reputation. And now, with her father gone and the truth unraveling, vultures were circling. "Waylon Briggs," Ellery muttered. "He's been sniffing around since the funeral." Boen nodded grimly. "And if he knows what was in that journal, he might think you don't deserve to keep it." That's when it hit her. The truth could be used against her, twisted to break her name the way fire breaks the soil. They rode back fast, Ashfall carrying Boen like he'd been bred for this moment. Ellery's heart pounded, not just from the ride, but from the realization that silence was no longer protection. It was a weapon being used against her. She'd tried so hard to preserve the image of her father, the myth of the Vance name. But myths burn fast when people pour gasoline on them. And now someone had lit the match. Back at the ranch, She found the journal gone from her room. Her breath caught in her throat. "Someone's already read it," she whispered. Boen searched the house with her, every drawer, every cabinet, every hollow place that once hid family sins. Nothing. The weight of betrayal hung in the air. This wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about control. And whoever had the truth now owned the future. That night, under a hard, quiet sky, Boen said only one thing before riding out alone. "If they want a war, they just got one." The wind had shifted by morning, carrying the bitter scent of scorched earth across the ranch. The fire on the ridge had died down, but the message remained, clear and threatening. Ellery stood by the paddock, arms crossed, watching the horizon like it might spit out more danger at any moment. Ashfall paced nearby, agitated, picking up on the tension in the air. She hadn't slept. Not after discovering the journal was gone. And not after Boen Kittredge rode off into the dark without telling her where he was going. She had her suspicions. Waylon Briggs had always wanted Vance land. He'd made lowball offers every year since her father got sick. But now, with the weight of Thatcher's secrets exposed and stolen, he had more than leverage. He had a weapon. Ellery knew the kind of man Waylon was. Smooth-talking, cold-eyed, and patient like a rattlesnake. He didn't need the land. He needed to destroy what it stood for. And with the truth in his hands, he finally could. Late that afternoon, Boen returned, dust-covered, bruised, but alive. "He's got it," he said before even dismounting. "The journal's locked in Briggs's office. He knows everything." Ellery's jaw tightened. "Then he knows my father confessed to a crime, and that he took the fall for you." Boen looked away. "He's going to use it to ruin your name. Make the town turn on you. Claim the ranch's reputation is built on a lie." The silence between them was sharp. Ellery's voice came cold. "Isn't it?" Boen didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at Ashfall, who had stopped pacing, ears perked, eyes steady. "Your father wasn't a perfect man," Boen said. "But he did what he did to protect this land, and you. Same as I would now." The words lingered, heavier than smoke. For a moment, Ellery didn't respond. But when she did, her voice was low and steady. "Then it's time we stop protecting the past and start fighting for the future." They hatched a plan before nightfall. Not a reckless one. Thatcher Vance wouldn't have tolerated that. It had to be precise, intentional. Ellery would confront Waylon at the town council meeting in 2 days. Public. Visible. But first, they had to get the journal back. Not to hide it, but to control the story before someone else twisted it. Boen would ride again that night, back to Briggs's estate. This time, he wouldn't be quiet about it. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, Ellery placed a hand on Ashfall's neck and whispered, "I hope you're ready too." Because whatever happened next wasn't going to end clean. The moon was high when Boen Kittredge reached the edge of Waylon Briggs's estate. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress dressed like a mansion. Motion sensor lights swept across the gravel driveway. Cameras hung from every corner. But Boen had broken into worse places with fewer reasons. This wasn't about theft. This was about taking back what never should have been stolen, truth, raw and dangerous as fire. He moved like a ghost through the shadows, ducking behind fencing and weaving between trees. Inside the office window, a dim light glowed. On the desk sat the leather journal, unmistakable. He felt his heart thud harder, not from nerves, but from purpose. It wasn't just Ellery's legacy in those pages. It was his own redemption. Everything he never said, everything Thatcher took to the grave. It was all right there, waiting to be twisted by a man who saw truth as leverage. Back at the ranch, Ellery stood in front of the mirror in her father's old study. She wore his silver belt buckle for the first time, The one he won at age 19 and never took off until the day he collapsed. She didn't feel like him. She felt like herself for the first time in years. Steady, angry, clear. The town council meeting was hours away. She had rehearsed her words 100 times, but she knew speeches meant nothing without honesty. She wasn't going there to defend her father's choices. She was going to own them. Boen made it inside Briggs's office without triggering the alarm. The door hadn't even been locked. Cocky. Typical. He reached for the journal, but a voice behind him stopped his hand cold. Looking for something, cowboy? Wayland stood in the doorway, glass of bourbon in hand, like he'd been expecting him. Funny how the past keeps dragging men like you back to places they were never meant to stay. Boen turned slowly, hands at his sides, heart pounding. You don't get to use his words, he said quietly. Wayland smirked. Your buddy Thatcher? He lied to everyone. Built an empire on it. You and I both know that. Bowen's voice was low but solid. He lied to protect the people he loved. You lie to own what you never earned. The two men stared each other down. In the quiet tension, the room felt like it might explode. Outside, a distant roll of thunder echoed across the valley. Back at the ranch, Ellery looked toward the hills, eyes hard with purpose. She didn't know yet whether Boen would succeed. But she knew one thing for sure. Tomorrow, the truth would ride into town, one way or another. The town hall was packed. Rows of wooden chairs filled the old brick building, worn boots scuffing the floor, murmurs rising and falling like nervous waves. Everyone in Calhoun County seemed to be there. Ranchers, councilmen, families who'd known the Vance name for generations. Wayland Briggs stood near the front, arms crossed, smug. He hadn't said a word yet. He didn't have to. He'd already whispered enough to the right people. The damage was in motion. Ellery Vance stepped up to the podium, shoulders squared beneath her father's old jacket. In her hand, she held the leather journal, retrieved hours earlier when Boen Kittredge rode back into the ranch at dawn, covered in bruises and ash, but holding it like a trophy. He never said what happened behind Wayland's doors, only that it's done. Ellery didn't ask. She just nodded. And now, as the room quieted, she opened the journal, and her voice carried. My father wasn't a perfect man, she began. He made decisions he never spoke about. Took the blame for things he didn't do alone. But he did it for this land. For his people. For me. She paused, looking out at the crowd. That truth doesn't erase his legacy. It completes it. You may want to judge him. You may want to judge me. But we don't get to choose how we're remembered. We only get to choose how we face what's true. Her voice didn't shake. Not once. Wayland shifted in his seat, jaw tight. He stood ready to speak, but the mayor raised a hand. You've said enough behind closed doors, Briggs, she said coldly. It's time we hear the truth in daylight. Wayland's mouth tightened. He sat back down, silenced not by force, but by presence. The room had turned, not just toward Ellery, but toward the idea that maybe, just maybe, honor wasn't about perfection. It was about what you did when the lies came loose. After the meeting, Boen stood outside by Ashfall, reins in hand. He looked out over the quiet town, the hills beyond bathed in gold. Ellery joined him, journal tucked under her arm. You're leaving, she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. You don't need me any more. You've got your truth now. She looked at him for a long moment. You helped me carry it. That matters. Boen placed a hand on Ashfall's shoulder. He chose you. Just like Thatcher knew he would. She stepped closer, eyes locked with his. You were never running from the past, Boen. You were riding straight into it. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled. Then I guess I made it.